1,200 days. According to the Congressional Budget Office, that is roughly how long America has before mandatory spending and debt service consume every single dollar of federal revenue. Not most of it, all of it. By 2029, according to CBO projections, the United States government will not collect enough taxes to cover Social Security, Medicare, and the interest on its own debt. Everything else, defense, infrastructure, education, will require borrowed money, money that the rest of the world is increasingly unwilling to lend. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen stood before Congress and declared, quote, "The dollar's position as the world's reserve currency is secure for the foreseeable future," end quote. She pointed to America's deep capital markets, its rule of law, its open financial system. She said no country could replicate what the United States offers. But according to the International Monetary Fund, the dollar's share of global reserves just hit 56.3%, down from 72% in 2001. That is a loss of 16 percentage points in 24 years, and the decline is accelerating. So who is telling the truth? The Treasury Secretary protecting her legacy, or the IMF data showing the largest sustained erosion of dollar dominance in modern history? Welcome to frozen assets. The world is shifting. And what is happening behind the headlines is about to change everything. Here is the official story. The dollar is fine. The dollar is irreplaceable. The dollar faces no serious challenger. According to Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, speaking at the Fed's inaugural conference on dollar dominance in June 2022, quote, "The dollar's international role is supported by the strength of the U.S. economy, its open financial markets, and the stability of our institutions," end quote. He acknowledged rapid changes in the global monetary system, but expressed confidence in America's structural advantages. Janet Yellen has repeated this message at every opportunity. In testimony before the Senate Banking Committee, she argued that America has, quote, "deep liquid open financial markets, strong rule of law, and an absence of capital controls that no country is able to replicate," end quote. She called concerns about de-dollarization overblown. She dismissed BRICS as incapable of creating a viable alternative. The reasoning sounds compelling. The euro has structural weaknesses baked into its design. The Chinese yuan lacks full convertibility. No other economy comes close to matching America's depth and liquidity. Where else would the world put its money? This is the argument you will hear on financial news networks. This is what Treasury officials tell foreign counterparts. This is the reassurance offered to anyone who asks whether America's fiscal trajectory poses a threat to dollar hegemony. It sounds reasonable. It sounds responsible. It sounds like a lie. Here is what they do not mention. According to IMF data analyzed by the Atlantic Council, the dollar's decline is not flowing to traditional competitors like the euro or yuan. Instead, central banks are diversifying into what researchers call non-traditional reserve currencies: Australian dollars, Canadian dollars, Korean won, Nordic currencies. The world is not waiting for a single replacement. The world is fragmenting away from the dollar entirely. According to World Gold Council data, central banks purchased over 1,000 tons of gold in 2024. That was the third consecutive year above 1,000 tons, more than double the 473-ton annual average from 2010 to 2021. This is the highest sustained central bank gold buying since 1967, the year the Bretton Woods system began its collapse. Ray Dalio, founder of Bridgewater Associates, the world's largest hedge fund, issued a stark warning in January 2026. Quote, "My grandchildren and great-grandchildren not yet born are going to be paying off this debt in devalued dollars," end quote. He described America as trapped in what he calls a debt death spiral and predicted, quote, "huge and unimaginable changes over the next 5 years," end quote. That timeline puts us at 2031. But according to CBO projections, the mathematical breaking point arrives sooner. By 2029, mandatory spending plus interest payments will exceed total federal revenue. America will be borrowing money just to keep the lights on. Larry Fink, CEO of BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager with over $10 trillion under management, wrote in his March 2025 shareholder letter, quote, "If the U.S. does not get its debt under control, if deficits keep ballooning, America risks losing that position to digital assets like Bitcoin," end quote. When the man who manages more money than anyone on earth warns that America could lose reserve currency status, that is not pessimism. That is pattern recognition from someone with everything to lose by being wrong. According to Moody's Investor Service, the United States no longer deserves a AAA credit rating. In May 2025, Moody's downgraded America from AAA to AA1. That made it unanimous. All three major credit rating agencies now rate the United States below their highest tier, for the first time in history. The official position is that the dollar is secure. The data tells a different story. The evidence keeps piling up. According to U.S. Treasury data, China has slashed its holdings of American government bonds from a peak of $1.317 trillion in 2013 to $682 billion by late 2025. That is a 47% reduction. The second largest foreign holder of American debt has cut its exposure nearly in half. But China is not alone. According to Treasury International Capital data, foreign investors now own just 32% of outstanding U.S. debt, down from 50% in 2014. The share of American debt held by foreigners has dropped by 18 percentage points in 11 years. Someone is selling, someone is leaving. According to the World Gold Council's 2025 survey of central bank reserve managers, 73% of respondents expect the U.S. dollar to play a smaller role in global reserves over the next 5 years. 73%. That is not a fringe view. That is the consensus among the people who actually manage national reserves. And 43% of those same central banks plan to increase their gold holdings, up from 29% the year before. 0% plan decreases. Look at who is buying gold and how much. According to World Gold Council data, Poland purchased 90 tons in 2024, making it the world's largest buyer. The governor of Poland's central bank, Adam Glapiński, stated, quote, "In these difficult times, gold is the only safe investment for state reserves," end quote. Turkey bought 75 tons. India bought 73 tons, 4 times its prior year purchases, and repatriated 100 tons of physical gold from the Bank of England. Even the official Chinese figures show 44 tons purchased, though analysts at the World Gold Council estimate actual Chinese buying at closer to 570 tons when accounting for unreported accumulation. Here is a number that should alarm anyone paying attention. According to calculations based on IMF and World Gold Council data, foreign central banks now hold more value in gold than in U.S. treasuries for the first time since 1996. Gold's share of global reserves has risen to 21%. That is a 4 percentage point jump, representing the largest increase in more than 40 years. According to Russian Finance Ministry data, 99% of trade between Russia and China is now settled in yuan and rubles, $0, $244.8 billion worth of bilateral trade in 2024, and virtually none of it touched the American financial system. According to data from the People's Bank of China, the cross-border interbank payment system known as CEPS processed $24.45 trillion in 2024. That is a 43% increase year over year. The system now has 1,683 participants across 189 countries. China is building the plumbing for a post-dollar world. According to the BRICS Council, 65% of trade among BRICS member nations is now settled in local currencies rather than dollars. BRICS represents 41% of global GDP measured by purchasing power parity. The G7 represents 28 to 30%. The bloc that is building alternatives to the dollar is already larger than the bloc that depends on it. And here is where it gets worse. According to the Congressional Budget Office, the federal government spent $952 billion on interest payments in fiscal year 2025. Some estimates from the Government Accountability Office put the figure closer to $1.2 trillion. Either way, interest on the debt is now the second largest item in the federal budget, larger than defense, second only to Social Security. According to CBO long-term projections, federal debt will reach 134% of GDP by 2035. That would exceed the peak reached during World War II. But unlike World War II, there is no end date, no victory that stops the spending. The debt just keeps growing. Nouriel Roubini, the economist known as Dr. Doom for predicting the 2008 financial crisis, wrote in 2025 that America faces what he calls a fiscal train wreck in slow motion. According to his analysis, the combination of mandatory spending growth, interest rate normalization, and political dysfunction makes debt reduction mathematically implausible without either massive cuts to entitlements or significant inflation. Neither is politically viable. So the debt grows. Which brings us to the pattern. This is not new. This is ancient. According to research by Barry Eichengreen at UC Berkeley and published by the National Bureau of Economic Research, the conventional wisdom about reserve currency transitions is wrong. Textbooks teach that the British pound gave way to the dollar over 30 to 70 years, from World War I through the 1976 IMF bailout. But Eichengreen's data shows the dollar actually overtook sterling in global reserves by the mid-1920s. Just 10 to 15 years after World War I began, the transition happened far faster than anyone assumed. The parallels are striking. According to historical data analyzed by the Bank of England, British government debt exploded from 27% of GDP in 1913 to over 130% by 1919. Interest payments consumed 44% of government spending by the mid-1920s, Britain could not maintain its global military commitments while servicing its debts. Sound familiar? It should. According to Treasury Department data, U.S. debt to GDP now exceeds 120%. Interest payments are the second largest budget item. America maintains over 750 military bases in 80 countries while running trillion-dollar annual deficits. The 1956 Suez Crisis proved that financial power trumps military power. According to historical records analyzed by the IMF, the United States threatened to dump its holdings of British sterling-denominated bonds unless Britain withdrew from Egypt. Britain withdrew. Within a decade, sterling's role as a global reserve currency was effectively finished. America bankrupted Britain without firing a shot. According to Benjamin Cohen, writing for the IMF's Finance and Development Journal, quote, "Sterling lost its position as an international currency because Britain lost its great power status, not the other way around," end quote. Military and financial dominance are mutually reinforcing. Lose one, and you threaten the other. The pattern is always the same. Debt accumulation, military overextension, denial by leadership, gradual then sudden loss of financial credibility. Britain denied reality for decades. British authorities used what Eichengreen describes as international blackmail, propaganda, and economic sanctions to prevent sterling-area countries from diversifying their reserves. It prolonged the decline, but did not prevent it. The United States is following the same playbook. Sanctions on Russia, threats against BRICS. Warnings to allies about using alternatives to the dollar. The tactics delay the inevitable. They do not change the math. Here is what this means for the world. According to Morgan Stanley, research published in January 2026, U.S. policy factors are now, quote, critical to the extent of the de-dollarization shift, end quote. The choices Washington makes in the next few years will determine whether dollar decline remains gradual or becomes disorderly. According to the Atlantic Council's Dollar Dominance Monitor, the greatest threat to the dollar is not external. It is, quote, the erosion of trust in the United States political and legal institutions, end quote. Foreign investors sold $63 billion in U.S. equities during March and April 2025 alone. The dollar index fell 8% through 2025. Capital is voting with its feet. For nations holding dollar reserves, the calculus is changing. According to a senior European Central Bank official quoted by Reuters, reserve managers are asking a simple question. If America can freeze $300 billion in Russian reserves with a single executive order, what stops them from doing the same to us? According to World Gold Council survey data, this concern is driving behavior. Central banks are not just diversifying, they are building alternatives, repatriating physical gold, joining non-dollar payment systems, reducing exposure to American financial infrastructure. The nation that controls the reserve currency controls global finance. The nation that loses it loses the ability to run deficits without consequence, to sanction enemies without retaliation, to print money without inflation. According to estimates by the Peterson Institute, reserve currency status saves America between $200 and $350 billion annually in borrowing costs. Losing it means paying market rates on $38 trillion in debt. So what happens next? Based on the current trajectory, the dollar will not collapse by 2029. No credible analyst predicts that. But based on CBO data and the pattern established by Britain's decline, 2029 represents a point of no return. The year when America's fiscal position becomes mathematically unsustainable without either default, inflation, or dramatic restructuring. According to Ray Dalio's analysis, we should expect, quote, huge and unimaginable changes over the next 5 years, end quote. Based on historical patterns documented by Eichengreen, reserve currency transitions can happen in 10 to 15 years, rather than the 30 to 70 years conventional wisdom assumes. If the transition began in earnest after the 2022 Russia sanctions, the window closes around 2032 to 2037. Based on World Gold Council survey data showing 73% of central banks expect a smaller dollar roll within 5 years, the institutional consensus places meaningful multipolarity by 2030. Not dollar collapse, but dollar decline sufficient to end American exceptionalism in global finance. Based on the British pattern, expect denial to continue until crisis forces acknowledgement. Expect the transition to appear gradual, then sudden. Expect the trigger to be something unexpected, a geopolitical shock, a debt auction that fails, a major ally that defects to an alternative system. The question is not whether the dollar's dominance will end. Every reserve currency in history has been replaced, every single one. The question is whether America will manage the transition or be managed by it. History does not repeat, but it echoes. Rome, Britain, the Soviet Union. The pattern is clear. The only question is whether you will see it in time. If this changed how you see the world, subscribe. The future is being decided right now. I will show you how.